Monsters.
This is going to be the matchup where Xenagos the Reveler really does a lot of work. I talked to Chris Van Meter on Magic Online the week leading up to the Invitational. They said they had done a lot of work on Gen Monsters. One of the big additions is cutting a Dombre for a 4th copy of Xenagos. This is primarily to help the Mono Black matchup, and so potentially he'll get paid off in a big way here.
See these players 12th and 13th on our leaderboard here for season number 2. Nelson again 8-3, as is Mann. Mono Black Devotion versus Gen Monsters. This matchup oftentimes very close.
Yes, both decks have a lot of tools that the other deck struggles with. You know, removal spells, Lifebane Zombie, a fast Desecration Demon, all problematic for Mono Black for the Jund side, and the Planeswalkers can cause all sort of headaches, and just large haste creatures as well.
It looks like Mann's going to take a mulligan at least once here. Nelson looks good to go. So we'll see. I think Brad is probably on the play here. As far as Mann's deck list is concerned, the first thing I always look for in Mono Black is it Nightveil Spectre or Lifebane Zombie? There's a slight mix here. 4 Spectres and only 1 Zombie, so it's actually going to come back to probably hurt Mann in this matchup a little bit.
A bit. To me, what really tips the scales in this matchup one direction or the other is the removal suite that Mono Black chooses to play. Bile Blight, not very good against Gen Monsters. Devour Flesh has moments of being okay, but lines up pretty poorly against the mana creatures and Xenagos the Reveler as well. So if the deck has more ultimate prices and Doom Blades and such, the matchup becomes much better. If they're playing a lot more of the Devour Flesh, Bile Blight type of stuff, the matchup becomes much worse.
As far as removal is concerned for Mann, he's got 4 copies of Devour Flesh, 2 Bile Blight, and an ultimate price, and of course 4 Heroes Downfall. So you're not going to find a lot of crazy things going on in Mono Black Devotion, a few cosmetic changes, but besides that, it's pretty straightforward. And we'll see if he can overcome at least 1 mulligan here.
The deck sort of just is what it is. There's not a lot of wiggle room in the list. There's only the removal suite. Maybe you play Duress main, but other than that, it's kind of set in stone.
And we are underway here. Temple of Abandon is where Nelson is going to start. You see there's a Domre in his hand. He's going to consult the grip. There's also, a Sylvan Caryatid there as well. And he's going to give this a long look over, as arguably the best standard player in the world is going to work.
I think he is the best mid-season deck builder for standard on the planet. You know, there's a lot of people who, to generate good week 1 lists, they can immediately identify the most powerful card or the most powerful linear strategy. I don't think Brad is necessarily that person, but if you say these are the 4 or 5 decks that people are playing, build something new to beat this metagame, I do believe Brad is in contention for best player on Earth.
It's time to see what Brad is working with here. There's a Gorklan Rampager, a Pulachronos, a Domri, a Sylvan Caryatid, and a couple of lands in Mutavault and Blood Crypt.
I think this is going to be a decision between Sylvan Caryatid and Domri. The other cards are pretty trivial for Steven to handle. You know, Pulachronos lines up pretty poorly with Heroes Downfall and such. So it's going to be, you know, if he can answer the Mana Accelerant with Devour Flesh, maybe he takes Domri, and otherwise he probably takes Domri, which is just the highest impact card in the hand. Oh, it looks like Steven mulliganed into a poor hand. It looks like it's just Lance and Grey Merchant, so he may even have to take Pulachronos because it's just the biggest short-term threat.
Decisions here for Mann. It's going to be a long Thoughtseize, it looks like, here for him. Maybe he could take the Accelerant, slow him down a little bit. Maybe that's what you hope for. That's not all that exciting. Maybe that's what you have to do.
It gives you probably gives you the most time to just draw consecutive meaningful cards. But I think he's priced into just hoping that he draws removal spells in the intermediate turns here, and then gets back into the game.
Looks like it's going to be Mutavault plus Sylvan Caryatid, passing it over to Nelson. Excuse me, to Mann. Will Nelson. His draw for the turn was a Blood Grip. Mann just going to play a Swamp, pass the turn back. Nelson draws his copy of Stormbreath Dragon. We know that's a good one. Blood Grip's going to come into play on tap. Nelson going to go down to 18. He's going to lead off with Pulachronos. Make Mann answer that. Another Swamp here for Mann. Not a great draw. Just going to play Mutavault and pass the turn.
His draw started out poorly, and it has not gotten better.
Mana Confluence was the draw there for Nelson. Nelson going to play Blood Crypt untapped as well. And he's just going to jam. This is a Stormbreath Dragon. This is an attack for 9. And it looks like Mann's going to go down to 9.
And that's how you play against Mono Black Devotion. You know, they can only play 1 spell a turn maximum, so just cast your stuff.
Didn't he do anything special that game?
Nope.
Brad Nelson going to win game number 1 here over Steven Mann. Jund Monsters up a game over Mono Black Devotion. We're going to head to the sideboards here. I've got Mann's in front of me. You see him going through right now. 2 copies of Erebos God of the Dead, 3 Duress, 2 Doom Blades, a Pithing Needle, 2 Drought and Sorrow, 3 Lifebane Zombie, an Underworld Connections, and a Rise of the Dark Realms.
Ooh. Fancy.
Don't see that one very often. 3 life banes are obvious. Same thing can be said for 2 Doom Blades. I actually like the needle here to shut down Domri and Xenagos, because Xenagos is so powerful in this matchup.
This is pretty straightforward sideboarding. It's give me the Doom Blades, give me the Life Bane Zombies, give me the Pithy Needle.
I think a small argument could be had for Duress, because Nelson has a lot of spells in his deck, and I assume he'll be bringing in more.
There is a small argument for Duress, but you know, I've watched a lot of this matchup, and even though Duress does land a reasonable percentage of the time, I feel like it's one of those cards where it leads to Mono Black Devotion just having, you know, the answers not lined up correctly against the threats, and that's the easiest way for the deck to lose. The deck's all about trading 1 for 1, and so when you have these mulligans, like you have this Duress that misses, for example, or you have a removal spell like Bile Blight in your hand that you can't effectively deploy, that's how Mono Black loses a lot of games. So I think the ceiling to bring in Duress has to be higher than my opponent has some targets that I care about. If he brought it in, I would still, you know, I wouldn't be blown away if he brought it in, but I think that to bring in Duress, you have to be certain it's landing, just kind of given the structure of Mono Black Devotion.
What do we got on Brad's side?
2 Doom Blades, a Dark Betrayal, a copy of Putrefy, 2 Chandra Pyromasters, a Faraska the Unseen, a Mizium Mortars, 2 Rakdos Return, a Golgari Charm, and 4 copies of Mistcutter Hydra. This is a really powerful sideboard, allows him to convert into a number of different decks. I think he's going to want, naturally, the Dark Betrayal and the Putrefy. That gives him answers to some of Steven's problematic creatures, especially Desecration Demon, which is something that's occasionally problematic for Jund monsters. I think the additional Planeswalkers are going to come in as well, as will the Rakdos Return. So just more cards that allow him to slog through an attrition match and more haymakers.
Well, Nelson is happy with his sideboarding. Mann's going to take a look right now as well before shuffling, presenting his deck. And Brad basically coming out 2 weeks ago and saying, hey, Chris Van Meter, you were right about this deck. This deck is way better than I gave it credit for. I'm playing a lot with it on Magic Online. I think it's the best deck in the format.
It is very powerful and very robust, really hard to hate out. It does have a pretty high percentage of draws in my mind that are not so bad that you mulligan them, but you keep and you're an underdog against nearly every deck in the format, especially the draws that just don't have mana accelerants. But when you do have mana acceleration, your draws are among the most powerful in the format. And to me, what really stands out this deck is sideboarding. He gets to have really high impact cards over a large spectrum of matchups. If he's playing against a very fast beatdown deck, he gets to have cards like Golgari Charm, Mizium Mortars, additional removal spells, Doom Blades and such. When he's playing against control decks, he gets more Planeswalkers and Rakdos Return. So it's not just about what's going on in game 1, it's about what's happening in games 2 and 3. And I think almost in every matchup, Jund Monsters gets better in post-board scenarios.
Yeah, I think that's one of the draws to the deck, is the sideboard cards are so high impact.
And versatile, you know. And we've seen things, you know, the deck can even go to something like Nylea's Disciple if it wants extra action for decks like Mono Red or Burn or so forth. There's a lot of cards to potentially pull from here. There's 2 copies of Chandra in the sideboard. We've seen that card not be in lists pretty frequently, so there's a deep well of cards to draw from that can shore up all sorts of matchups.
Well, Nelson present his deck. Mann will do the same. Stephen Mann will play for game number 2. Pro Tour top 8 competitor at Pro Tour Gatecrash last year. Stephen Mann top 8 with Jund. We've seen him win a Legacy Open earlier this year. It was actually on my birthday in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
He got the job done with Rug Delver when my foot was broken.
When your foot was broken.
Yeah. But me and my foot, we get along now.
That's good.
We're okay.
I'm glad your dedication to physical fitness has allowed you to now start to run without breaking your foot. That's
I do too.
That's a big step up.
A step in the right direction, yeah. It had more to do with the shoes I was wearing, but sure. Hey, Thoughtseize, we'll start things off. Look, it's not cool. One thing about feet, it's not good when they hurt.
Oh, yeah.
That's the thing. It's a very slow hand here for Nelson. A Chandra, a Xenagos, a Stormbreath Dragon, and a Abrupt Decay, a couple of Temples and a Stomping Ground.
But this is the type of hand that's really well suited to battle through an opponent that's sided into a bunch of Doom Blades, you know? 1-for-1 removal is not going to cut it against this kind of draw, so really speaks to the versatility of Jund Monsters in post-board scenarios.
Abrupt Decay would be a pretty easy choice, but let's see if that's what Mann wants to take or not.
It feels like all these cards matter.
Yeah, it really does. Even though Stormbreath is much further down the road, still a really good card.
Yeah, it's high impact. I would be stunned if he took it off of the Thoughtseize here, but it's another thing that's going on.
Mann's hand right now is Doomblade, Underworld Connections, and just lands. So again, you could see an argument for taking Abrupt Decay, or you could just see an argument for just leaving it alone and Maybe trying to slog through and take one of these planeswalkers.
Yeah, that's the tough thing. I mean, the Underworld Connections is the one thing that Steven really has going on in his hand, but taking a purely reactive card in that spot when your opponent has so many high-impact proactive cards is really tough.
Temple of Malice is the land that Brad puts into play, but his draw last turn was quite the good one. It was a copy of Sylvan Caryatid.
And it really speaks to the power of Xenagos in this matchup, where even with Underworld Connections as your lone piece of action, with an opponent having an Abrupt Decay in their hand, you still take the Planeswalker.
Mutavault plus pass. Nelson draws a copy of Domri. And now it is that Caryatid. So Mann with no Devour Flesh, all he can do is simply draw a card. It's another swamp, and he's been flooding pretty badly in these 2 games.
His draws have not been good and have not gotten better with draw steps.
There are times where Mono Black Devotion looks dominating and overpowering. It has not so far this match.
I really like Chandra a lot in the sideboard of these decks because the card that people most frequently go to punish you when you're playing Jump Monsters is Lifebane Zombie. Chandra is so good against Lifebane Zombie and just powerful in a slow, grindy game that it shores up numerous weaknesses.
Man trying to decide what he's supposed to do on this turn. Or at least take his time here and bluff as though he has some strength. See if Nelson can see through that. Brad waiting patiently, flicking the cards back and forth in his hand. He's ready to play a Planeswalker on the next turn.
Well, it's possible Steven's debating if he wants to just cast the Connections this turn because he knows that if Brad Abrupt Decays, it's at the expense of playing a Planeswalker this turn. So it's not just posturing. There is an argument for Steven just to cast the Underworld Connections last turn.
But instead, just a swamp and passing of the turn.
And I like that quite a bit too because Steven's hand is so bad that he needs to probably draw at least 1 card off this Connections.
Temple's going to put the top card to the bottom. And now here is Domri. So that Planeswalker will resolve. It'll take up to 4. The top card is another copy of Sylvan Caryatid. Passing the turn back over to Mann.
And this is pretty frustrating stuff if you're Steven here. Brad's hand was already really good to start with from what you saw from that Thought Season. It has gotten much better with each draw step.
There's Underworld Connections. And of course, the reason for the delay on that is 1, to play around Abrupt Decay, but 2, now he gets the card right away.
Yeah.
Nelson draws a card for the turn. Looks to be a copy of Mutavault. Nelson going to start by ticking up Domri. That's an Elvish Mystic. So Domri is 2 for 2 in game number 2.
And this is just a great conversion here by Brad. Again, he's just capable of now fighting Steven in long games with all of these repeating sources of card advantage.
Yeah, I think this is exactly where you want to be.
Yeah.
Just going towards Planeswalkers in this matchup, overloading those heroes' downfalls.
I don't know if Jump Monsters is the best 60 cards in the format, but it very well may be the best 75.
And that matters.
Yeah, no, you play more games post-board than pre-board, so. I think Brad now is debating whether he wants to advance his board or just blow up the Underworld Connections now. Because he does have his turn this turn could be Abrupt Decay, your Underworld Connections, play a land, the Caryatid, and the Elvish Mystic.
Which is not a bad turn at all.
Or he could deploy a Planeswalker this turn. So he's just trying to figure out how much he really cares about letting Steven draw an extra card.
There's a Caryatid. That's a Mystic. So you see him developing his mana. I'll pass the turn back. And now here's your Abrupt Decay. So it goes with the Mana Acceleration plus Take Care of Connections route. Understandable.
And you're also getting a real clinic here on why cards like Devour Flesh and Bile-Blight just don't have much of an impact here against a deck like Jund Monsters.
So Mann picked up a copy of Devour Flesh, also an Underworld Connections as well. So he can redeploy Connections, but that again will take up his entire turn.
Yeah.
Which is where Nelson would likely want you to be, having to waste that time to get that online.
And Mono Black Devotion is at its best when it has Connections running, it's drawing 2 cards a turn. But Brad can easily keep up with that.
Oh, yeah. That's easy breezy.
Yeah. Although Steven has drawn some live cards in the last couple of turns here, so he is pulling himself back into the game, but he got into an enormous hole here early on with the quality of Brad's draw combined with having just not very much going on.
Connection's going to draw a card right away. Gray Merchant is what's been found. There's a swamp. Pass the turn back. Nelson will take a draw. It's another copy of Domri. That one doesn't matter. Elevator moves up to 6. It's a miss this go around. Doesn't mean it's a land. It can certainly be one of the high impact spells after sideboard.
And Brad does have to get a move on here for as much card advantage as he's generating. You know, Steven starts chaining together Gray Merchants, especially with Brad unable, by the looks of things, to kill that, be able to kill that Underworld Connections. Could get hairy for him.
Nelson deciding right now if he wants to deploy Stormbreath Dragon or is it time to maybe go Chandra and still continue to build an advantage. This is 4 mana.
This feels like a good spot to me to stick Stormbreath Dragon when you know there's no risk of it getting killed in combat. You get at least one hit with it. There's no guarantee that'll be the case in subsequent turns.
Looks like the decision is to deploy more Planeswalkers, so mystery card is a Stomping Ground. Of course, he did know that. And now it's time to fire at Mutavault. Attack here for 3, put man down to 13. And now we'll just pass the turn back. Will Nelson over to man. Nelson with a pretty nice board here. But as you mentioned, he's got to get the move on.
Yeah, Steven is clawing his way back into this game. Look at his hand there. There's a couple Gray Merchants. His Connections is up and running. These Gray Merchants are going to be able to buy him a lot of time. More than likely, he's going to need to find, I believe, 3 copies of the card to be able to pull out of this game. But there's at least a path. It did not appear that that was the case a couple turns ago.
Man, surveying the position here, as you mentioned, multiple Gray Merchants. You see the Devour Flesh there, but Devour Flesh is not good in this position. He can't target himself with it to gain some life in that racing situation if we get there.
I was about to mention, I think it is way more likely that Steven casts it targeting himself than he casts it targeting Brad in this game.
Well, many games have been won with Devour Flesh targeting yourself.
I have lost plenty of games that way.
A land comes rolling off in the form of a swamp here for man.
Desecration Demon's just so big, you know?
Pretty big. Pretty big.
And I can barely deal 20. So it's just, you can't. Certainly not dealing 28.
Man, gotta reorganize that mana. Maybe it's time for a discard spell. Looks to be. Stormbreath, Domri, and a Blood Crypt. Gotta imagine Stormbreath's gonna bite the dust here.
Yeah, not a lot going on in Brad's hand here. He is close to threatening a Domri ultimate, but he is slow on pressure. Steven's gonna have some time to cobble together a better board for these Gray Merchants.
Man, also with a Doomblade in hand as well. As you mentioned, Nelson could have taken the opportunity last turn to get a shot in with the Stormbreath Dragon. Opted to go the Pyromaster route instead. Looks like man took Domri because he does have an answer to the Dragon with Doomblade.
Sure.
However, Nelson going to try to continue to overwhelm man with these Planeswalkers. Going to start by zeroing this. That's a Sylvan Caryatid.
Surprising to me that Steven feels he can be competitive in a long game here, which is what last turn felt like.
Gonna tick this up. That's a Scavenging Ooze. Not sure if Nelson has a Rakdos' Return in his hand or not. It kind of is what it looks like, but I'm not positive.
There's a Stormbreath Dragon, an Ooze, a Blood Crypt, and another Chandra.
And here comes just a Mutavault. Here's an attack for 3. Man says, I'm going to take this too. That's fine. Nelson maybe going to go with the Ooze to get the Doomblade out. Start by casting the Caryatid. And now this will be the Ooze. Not willing to deploy that Stormbreath just yet. You got to imagine when your opponent doesn't take it with Thoughtseize, they have a removal spell for it.
For sure. You know, I think Steven's play last turn is totally reasonable, but Brad sniffed it out and he's just doing other stuff with his mana. Given how many resources Brad has to work with here, if Steven wants to hold up 2 mana for the whole game, Brad's going to be able to overwhelm him pretty easily.
Yeah, feel free.
And any time that Steven puts his shields down, then Brad can play Stormbreath.
Brad's got plenty of other things to do.
Yeah.
Man taking a long look at the grip. He's going to start by playing Swamp. It's Gray Merchant time, presumably, and it is. So that'll be gain and drain for 4. Mana go up to 11, Nelson go down to 14. And Nelson will untap. You see Mann left with just that Swamp. It has connections on it and a Mutavault.
Now, this may be a spot where Brad's willing to play the Stormbreath Dragon into a removal spell, because at least it costs Steven an activation of his Underworld connections.
Yep. See the draw there.
Or I can just draw another Stormbreath Dragon.
That makes it easy.
Deploy 2. That is also...
That's fun.
That's also not bad here.
Yeah, the 2 Planeswalkers to work with still.
Yeah. Remember that Chandra's plus power also allows, makes the creature targets unable to block, so Brad can also send in with some of his smaller creatures in the spot as well.
Yeah, a lot of text on that one. I think a lot of people forget the fact that Chandra makes this so the creature can't block. You are able to deal 1 and then 1 to something, to a player and then a creature.
Right.
But that creature that takes 1, no block skis.
And it looks like that is what Brad is doing.
5 mana. That's a dragon. 5 mana. That's a dragon. Let's giddy up, shall we?
So Steven is facing lethal here, so this requires the use of a Doomblade. But, you know, this is not necessarily all doom and gloom. I mean, if Nightveil Spectre is in Steven's deck still, he can draw it and Gray Merchant next turn. Play it and Gray Merchant.
That's not a bad turn either. I mean, he has forced to Doomblade something here, and of course he can't block, so you can't be too thrilled with how things are going, but your hand is forced.
Yeah. I mean, if post-combat Brad uses the Domri to fight the Gray Merchant, then I think Steven runs out of ways to win the game. He just needs more permanents in play. But there is still some shot of him clawing his way back in if his draws are perfect and Brad messes up.
Now there's Doomblade on the dragon. So 6 damage is going to come across, and there's your fight, which we had a feeling we'd see. Can't imagine Brad missing those lines.
Yeah.
He's just too good at this format.
He's aware, you know, Steven, the only way that he can win this game is by cobbling together some running sequence of Gray Merchants, and so he's going to do everything in his power to protect himself from that sequence.
Activation of connections is going to put Mann down to 3. Desecration Demon's not going to do it either, and he's going to extend the hand. Brad Nelson's going to win this match over Steven Mann. 2-0. A dominating performance there by Judd Monsters.
Yeah, game 1, you know, Steven's draw was really bad. Not a lot to be said about it. But in those post-board games there, it feels like Brad's list becomes really effective against a deck like Mono Black Devotion. He still has a healthy amount of pressure. He can still play his beatdown game, which he has to in the matchup. But he has more resources that allow him to keep pace with Steven when he's generating his card advantage. And what was also critical in that match to me, it felt like there are spots where Steven is just, I have mana available for Doomblade, where if you invest your mana just playing a Palakranos or playing a Stormbreath Dragon, those are kind of the tempo swings that allow Steven to then start pushing forward with his card advantage and really get the ball rolling.